26-year-old dying horse stops eating, but suddenly he hears a familiar voice, and this happens. The summer air crackled with electricity as thunder rolled across the darkening sky. But it wasn't the approaching storm that had 12-year-old Emily Matthews running toward the barn. It was the sound of frightened whinnying coming from inside. She knew that voice. She'd know it anywhere. "I'm coming, Thunder!" she called out, her boots squelching in the mud as she raced across the farmyard. The massive red barn doors were usually difficult for her to budge, but tonight, adrenaline gave her strength she didn't know she had. Inside, lightning flashed through the high windows, illuminating the familiar figure of her beloved horse. Thunder, a magnificent 17-hand American quarter horse, stood trembling in his stall, his usual confident bearing replaced by fear. At 16 years old, he'd seen his share of storms, but something about this one had him spooked. Emily didn't hesitate. She marched straight into his stall, ignoring her mother's constant warnings about approaching a frightened horse. But Thunder was different. He'd been different since the day they found him 3 years ago, half-starved and suspicious of humans, abandoned in a field near their property. "Hey, big guy," she whispered, placing her small hand on his muscular neck. The horse's trembling eased almost immediately at her touch. "Remember what we always say. We're brave together." Thunder lowered his massive head, nickering softly as he pressed his velvety muzzle against her shoulder. Emily smiled, remembering the first time he'd done that, 2 weeks after they'd brought him home. Her parents had been ready to give up on the seemingly untrainable horse, but Emily had persisted, spending hours just sitting near his paddock, reading books aloud and sharing her secrets. Then one morning, as she'd been telling him about her troubles with math class, Thunder had walked over and gently pressed his nose against her shoulder, as if to say, "I understand." From that moment on, they were inseparable. "You know what?" Emily said, reaching into her pocket for an apple she'd saved from lunch. "I think this calls for a special treat." Thunder's ears pricked forward, his storm anxiety forgotten as he delicately took the fruit from her palm. What Emily couldn't know, was that this would be one of their last peaceful moments together. Up at the main house, her parents were sitting at the kitchen table, bills spread out before them, their faces drawn with worry. The drought had hit the farm hard this year, and the recent medical bills from her little brother Tommy's accident had depleted their savings. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the previous night's storm had never happened. Emily woke early, as she always did, eager to start her morning routine with Thunder. But as she bounded down the stairs, she froze at the sound of hushed voices from the kitchen. "We don't have a choice, Sarah," her father was saying, his voice rough with emotion. "The bank won't extend our loan, and Thunder's feed alone costs us hundreds each month." "But it'll break her heart, John," her mother replied. "That horse is her whole world. And keeping him could cost us our farm. What then? Where would Thunder live if we lose everything?" Emily's world tilted on its axis. She must have made some sound, a gasp, a whimper, because suddenly both her parents were looking at her, their faces etched with guilt and sorrow. "Emily, honey," her mother started, but Emily was already running, tears blurring her vision as she raced to the barn. Thunder sensed her distress the moment she burst through the doors. He stretched his neck over the stall door, nickering softly as she threw her arms around him, burying her face in his warm neck. "They can't take you," she whispered fiercely. "I won't let them." But even as she made that promise, Emily knew she was powerless to keep it. She was just a kid, and kids didn't get to make the big decisions, no matter how much those decisions hurt. The next few days passed in a blur of tears and desperate attempts to change her parents' minds. Emily made charts showing how she could cut costs, offered to give up her allowance, even suggested she could give riding lessons to earn money. But with each gentle rejection, she saw the truth in her parents' eyes. This wasn't a choice they wanted to make, but one they had to. What made it worse was that Thunder seemed to sense the change coming. He became more attentive than ever, following Emily's movements with his intelligent eyes, nickering softly whenever she approached. It was as if he was trying to memorize her, just as she was trying to memorize him. The night before the auction, Emily snuck out to the barn. She'd brought Thunder's favorite treats, apples and peppermints, and her old copy of Black Beauty, the book she'd read to him during those first difficult weeks. As she sat in his stall, Thunder curled his neck around her like a protective embrace, and together they watched the stars through the barn window. "I need you to promise me something," Emily whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Promise you'll be brave without me. Promise you'll let someone else love you." Thunder's soft breath ruffled her hair, and she could almost believe he understood. What Emily couldn't know was that Thunder did understand, more than any horse should. He understood loss. He'd known it before, in the dark days before Emily found him. He understood love. He'd learned it from this small human who had given him back his trust in the world. And he understood sacrifice. He could feel it in the trembling of Emily's hands as she hugged him goodbye. But there was something else Thunder understood, something that would become important in the years to come. He understood waiting. And deep in his heart, where his love for Emily lived, he made his own promise, to wait for her, no matter how long it took. The auction house buzzed with activity, a cacophony of voices echoing off metal walls as potential buyers moved from stall to stall. Thunder stood quietly in his temporary pen, his coat still glossy from Emily's final grooming. A red ribbon pinned to his stall declared him Lot 147, experienced family horse, good with children. Marcus Fletcher prowled the aisles, his keen eyes assessing each animal with the cold calculation of a businessman. He wasn't looking for a family horse, he was looking for an opportunity. Years of experience had taught him how to spot valuable horses that could be bought cheap and sold high. Something about Lot 147 caught his attention. The horse's conformation was excellent, despite his age. But it was the intelligence in those dark eyes that really interested Marcus. Smart horses could be trained for all sorts of profitable ventures. He made a few quiet inquiries, learning about the financial troubles of the selling family, and knew he'd found his target. When Thunder's turn came up for auction, Marcus played his part perfectly. He dressed like a gentleman farmer, spoke of his grandchildren's love of horses, and made all the right promises to Emily's tearful parents. The other bidders, seeing his respectable appearance and hearing his plans for Thunder, gradually dropped out. The final hammer price was less than half what Thunder was worth. "Don't worry," Marcus assured Emily's father as they completed the paperwork. "He'll have a wonderful life with us." He even allowed Emily one final moment with Thunder, watching with hidden impatience as the girl whispered something in the horse's ear. What Marcus couldn't hear was Emily's final promise. "I'll find you again. No matter what, I'll find you." But Marcus Fletcher had no intention of keeping Thunder. Before the day was out, he had already made a call to a contact in the next state, a man who ran a tourist trail riding operation and was always looking for cheap horses. The profit would be quick and clean. Thunder's first indication that something was wrong came during the loading process. Gone were the gentle hands and soft words he was accustomed to. Instead, rough commands and a sharp crop urged him into an unfamiliar trailer. The drive was long and uncomfortable, the trailer packed with other horses, all of them nervous and uncertain. When they finally stopped, Thunder found himself in a very different world from the one he'd known. The stable was crowded, the stalls small and dirty. There was no green pasture to graze in, only a dusty paddock where horses were turned out in shifts. His new owner, a heavy-set man named Bill Grayson, saw horses as nothing more than tools for his business. "He's too old for the regular trails," Bill declared after a cursory examination. "Put him with the beginner groups. At least he's bomb-proof." And so began Thunder's new life. Day after day, he plodded along the same dusty trails, carrying inexperienced riders who pulled at his mouth and kicked his sides with clumsy feet. The trail guides were often teenagers who knew little about horses and cared less. They rarely noticed when a saddle was pinching or a bit was adjusted wrong. But the worst part wasn't the work, it was the loneliness. In Emily's barn, Thunder had been a cherished family member. Here, he was just another piece of equipment. No one brushed him just for the joy of it. No one brought him apple treats or read him stories. No one noticed when he started losing weight or when his coat began to dull. The years passed, and Thunder's spirit began to fade. He stopped looking for kindness in human hands. He stopped hoping for better food or softer words. He simply existed, putting one hoof in front of the other, day after day. Then came the accident. It wasn't anyone's fault, really, just a perfect storm of circumstances. A sudden thunderstorm, a frightened child pulling too hard on the reins, and a hidden hole in the trail. Thunder did everything right. He kept his footing, protected his rider, and made it back to the stable despite the shooting pain in his left front leg. But trail horses had to be sound, and Thunder's injury meant weeks of recovery. Bill Grayson wasn't the type to invest in veterinary care for an aging horse. "Send him to the auction," he ordered. "We'll get what we can for him." This auction was different from the first. No glossy coat, no red ribbon declaring him good with children. Thunder stood in a crowded pen with other unwanted horses, his head low, his injured leg carefully favored. He barely noticed the rough hands that prodded him, or the cold eyes that assessed his remaining worth. What no one knew, what no one could possibly guess, was that fate was about to play an unexpected card. Because in his pocket, Bill Grayson carried a business card given to him that morning by a young veterinary student who'd been asking questions about caring for retired trail horses. The card read, "Emily Matthews, student veterinarian," and listed a phone number that would never be called. Thunder had stopped eating 2 days ago. The pain in his leg, the stress of the crowded pen, and the weight of his broken spirit had finally become too much. As he waited for his turn in the auction ring, he thought about Emily, not the young girl she had been, but the woman she must be now. He remembered his promise to wait for her, but after 10 years, even promises could fade. What he couldn't know was that at that very moment, Emily Matthews was rushing through traffic, a newspaper clipping clutched in her hand. The headline read, "Local trail riding operation closes horses to be auctioned." It had taken her years of searching, following leads and dead ends, but something about this sale felt different. She had a feeling, the same feeling she'd had the day they first found Thunder in that abandoned field. The auction house loomed before Emily like a fortress of lost hopes. She'd been to dozens of these sales over the years, each time believing she might find Thunder, each time leaving with an empty trailer and a heavier heart. But today felt different. Her hand touched the lucky horseshoe hanging from her rearview mirror, the same one that had fallen from Thunder's hoof the day he left. Inside, the air was thick with dust and desperation. Emily moved through the crowded aisles, her trained veterinarian's eye noting the conditions of the horses she passed. Some were well cared for animals whose owners had fallen on hard times. Others showed signs of long-term neglect that made her professional heart ache. She checked her watch, still 30 minutes before the auction began. Time enough to look at every horse, even in the overflow pens outside. Emily had learned to be systematic in her searches, to control the hope that threatened to overwhelm her each time she saw a horse of Thunder's color or build. A commotion near the main entrance drew her attention. A group of people were clustered around someone who had apparently fainted. Emily's medical training kicked in, and she rushed to help. The crowd parted as she approached, revealing an elderly man being helped to his feet by auction staff. "I'm a veterinary student," Emily said, kneeling beside him. "Sir, are you all right?" The man blinked at her in confusion, then his eyes suddenly cleared. "Matthews," he said, surprising her. "You're John Matthews' girl, aren't you?" Emily stared at him, trying to place the familiar face. Then it hit her, Mr. Anderson, their old neighbor from the farm. The man who had tried to buy Thunder at the first auction, before Marcus Fletcher outbid him. "I've been looking for you," Mr. Anderson said, his voice urgent despite his weakness. "For years now. That horse, your Thunder, I saw him again, about 5 years after the sale. Fletcher sold him to a trail riding outfit. I tried to track you down, but your family had moved." Emily's heart raced. "Where? Which trail riding outfit?" "Grayson's Holiday Trails," he said, then coughed. "But that was years ago. Bill Grayson was a hard man with his horses. I'm sorry, Emily. I should have done more back then." A young auction worker approached with a cup of water. Sir, the medics are on their way. Miss, could you stay with him until they arrive? Emily hesitated, torn between her duty to help and her desperate need to continue searching. Mr. Anderson seemed to read her mind. Go, he said softly. I'm fine. Just the heat and my full pride, not taking my medication this morning. Find your horse, Emily. And remember, sometimes the ones who look the most broken are just waiting for someone to see past the hurt. Emily squeezed his hand in gratitude and hurried on. Grayson's holiday trails, finally, a solid lead. But as she moved through the auction house, a new worry gnawed at her. If Thunder had been with a trail riding operation known for being hard on its horses, what condition would he be in now? The overflow pens were behind the main building, a maze of temporary corrals under the hot sun. Emily moved more quickly now, her eyes scanning each pen. Most held groups of horses, but a few contained single animals, the ones too weak or ill-tempered to be housed with others. In the last pen, a solitary figure stood with his head lowered, ribs visible beneath a dull coat. Emily almost passed by. This horse was clearly much older than Thunder would be, much more worn. But something made her stop. Something about the way he held himself, even in his despair, reminded her of dignity. She approached the pen slowly, not wanting to startle him. The horse didn't move, didn't even flick an ear in her direction. Up close, she could see the swelling in his left front leg, the way he carefully avoided putting weight on it. Years of veterinary training told her this was an old injury, poorly healed. Hey there, beautiful, she said softly, using the same words she'd always used with Thunder. Would you like some company? The horse's ear twitched, just slightly, but it was something. Emily continued talking, keeping her voice low and gentle. She told him about her day, about Mr. Anderson's surprise appearance, about her long search. As she talked, she studied him more carefully. The coat that she thought was plain brown showed traces of familiar markings under the dirt. The shape of his head, the slope of his shoulder. Her heart began to pound. Thunder? She whispered. Thunder, is that you? The horse remained motionless, but Emily saw a tremor run through him. Slowly, carefully, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a peppermint, Thunder's favorite treat. The crinkle of the wrapper echoed in the quiet air. For the first time, the horse raised his head. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The eyes that met hers were dulled by pain and age, but she knew them. She would always know them. Oh my God, she breathed. It really is you. Thunder took a shuddering breath, and Emily saw awareness flood back into his eyes. He remembered her. After all these years, all the hardship, he remembered. But even as joy surged through her, Emily's professional training sent up warning flags. Thunder's condition was worse than she'd initially realized. He wasn't just tired or undernourished, he was giving up. The sound of a truck engine starting nearby made Thunder flinch, and Emily saw fear replace the brief spark of recognition in his eyes. Whatever had happened to him in the years since she'd lost him had left deep scars, and not all of them were physical. An auction worker appeared at her elbow. Miss? We're starting in 5 minutes. This one's lot number 23, early in the sale. You might want to head inside if you're interested in bidding. Emily nodded, not taking her eyes off Thunder. I'll be there, she said. And I'm not leaving without him. What she didn't say, what she couldn't say aloud, was that she wasn't sure if she'd found Thunder in time. The horse before her was balanced on the edge of a precipice, and she wasn't sure if even love would be enough to bring him back. The auction ring seemed smaller than Emily remembered from her childhood, the wooden barriers more weathered, the sawdust floor more sparse. She found a seat near the front, her hands clutching the bidding paddle so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her mind raced with calculations, her savings, her credit card limits, the emergency fund she'd been building since vet school. A tall man in a black cowboy hat caught her attention. He moved through the crowd with purpose, stopping to talk to various people, showing them something on his phone. Emily's instincts, honed by years of searching for Thunder, told her something was wrong. She wasn't the only one watching him. Mr. Anderson, now recovered from his earlier spell, had taken a seat beside her. "That's Mike Dawson," he said quietly. "He buys for the Mexican slaughterhouses. Shows people videos of their horses being rehomed to loving families, but it's all fake." Emily's stomach churned. "But that's illegal now, isn't it?" "Officially, yes. But there are ways around the laws. They call it shipping for processing instead of slaughter. The prices are good, and people believe what they want to believe." Before Emily could respond, the auctioneer's voice boomed through the speakers, announcing the start of the sale. The first few lots went quickly, mostly young, healthy horses that brought decent prices. Emily watched Dawson carefully. He bid on almost everything, but only up to a certain price point. Then it was Thunder's turn. Emily's heart nearly stopped as two handlers led him into the ring. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, he looked even worse than he had in the pen. His head hung low, his steps slow and uncertain. The injured leg trembled with each step. The auctioneer's practiced patter faltered slightly as he took in Thunder's condition. "Lot 23, gentlemen. Experienced trail horse, sound enough for light work or companion animal. Who'll start the bidding at $300? The silence that followed was deafening. Emily raised her paddle, her voice clear and strong. "300. We have 300. Do I hear 350? Mike Dawson's hand went up lazily. 350. Emily's heart pounded. 400. 450. The price climbed steadily. Emily could feel the audience's attention shifting between her and Dawson, could hear the murmurs of speculation. Thunder stood quietly in the center of the ring, seemingly unaware of the battle being waged over his fate. At $800, Emily's voice shook slightly as she bid. It was more than she'd expected to pay, more than she could really afford. But the alternative was unthinkable. Dawson smiled coldly. 850. Emily took a deep breath. 900. It was everything she had, plus maxing out her credit card. She prayed it would be enough. 950. Dawson countered immediately. Emily's heart sank. She was out of money, out of options. Thunder's head had lifted slightly during the bidding, as if he sensed something important was happening. She couldn't let him down. Not again. "Thunder!" The name burst from her lips before she could stop it, her voice carrying across the auction ring. "Thunder, it's me. It's Emily." The change was immediate and dramatic. Thunder's head snapped up, his ears swiveling toward her voice. For the first time since she'd found him, his eyes focused with absolute clarity. He took a stumbling step toward her, then another. The audience had gone completely silent. Even the auctioneer stopped his chant, watching as the old horse moved with sudden purpose toward the rail where Emily stood. "Miss," one of the handlers started, moving to stop Thunder, but Mr. Anderson intervened. "Wait," he said, his voice carrying authority. "Let them be." Thunder reached the rail, and Emily stretched out her hand to him. With infinite gentleness, he pressed his muzzle into her palm, just as he had done thousands of times in their shared past. A collective sigh went through the crowd. "That's quite a reunion," the auctioneer said, his professional demeanor softening. "Would anyone like to share the story?" Emily hadn't planned to speak, but the words came pouring out. She told them about finding Thunder abandoned, about their years together, about the financial hardships that had torn them apart. She told them about her search, about becoming a vet so she could help other horses while she looked for him. Her voice broke as she described his condition now, but her veterinary training gave weight to her words. "He needs extensive rehabilitation," she concluded. "The leg injury wasn't treated properly, but it can be managed with the right care. I can give him that care. I just can't quite meet the current bid." Mike Dawson shifted uncomfortably as dozens of eyes turned to him. The facade of the kindly horse buyer had cracked, revealing something colder underneath. Then Mr. Anderson stood up. "I've got $50 toward the cause," he announced, pulling out his wallet. "This young lady gave up her childhood horse to save her family's farm. Now she's a vet still trying to save him. Who's with me?" A woman in the third row stood up. I've got another 50. 100 here, called someone else. What happened next would be talked about in the local horse community for years to come. People who had come to buy horses started pulling out their wallets instead. Children emptied their pockets of change. Even some of the auction staff contributed. Mr. Anderson collected the money, counting it quickly. That's more than enough to match the bid, young lady. Go ahead. Emily's voice was strong and clear as she called out. $1,000. Dawson looked around the room, taking in the united front of the crowd. With a shrug that tried too hard to appear casual, he turned and walked out. $1,000 bid. The auctioneer called. Going once, going twice. Sold to the young lady in the front row. And might I say, that's exactly where this horse belongs. The first night in Emily's barn was the hardest. Thunder refused to enter the stall, trembling at the sight of the enclosed space. Hours of gentle coaxing couldn't convince him to step inside. Finally, Emily made a decision that went against conventional wisdom. She converted the small paddock outside into a makeshift shelter, letting Thunder choose where he felt safe. He's been trapped too long, she explained to her colleague, Dr. Sarah Chin, who had come to help assess Thunder's condition. We need to let him know he has choices now. The medical examination revealed the full extent of Thunder's injuries. Beyond the obvious leg problem, there were old saddle sores, signs of chronic malnutrition, and dental issues that suggested years of inappropriate feed. But it was his blood work that truly alarmed them. His organ function is compromised, Dr. Chen said, studying the results. The combination of stress, poor nutrition, and untreated pain has taken a serious toll. Emily, I have to be honest, at his age, with these issues, many vets would recommend euthanasia. Emily's hands clenched into fists. That's not an option. I know you have a history with him, but it's not about our history. Emily interrupted. Look at his eyes, Sarah. Really look. When I called his name at the auction, he came back from wherever his mind had gone. He's still fighting. As long as he's fighting, I'm fighting too. Dr. Chen's expression softened. All right. But we do this by the book. Full rehabilitation protocol. And if at any point his quality of life becomes compromised. I'm a vet too, Emily reminded her. I'll know. But that's not going to happen. The rehabilitation began slowly. Emily started with basic care, proper feeding, gentle grooming, and medications for pain and inflammation. Thunder was put on a carefully calculated diet to help him regain weight without stressing his system. Every few hours, day and night, Emily would bring him small meals, talking softly as he ate. A breakthrough came 3 days later when Emily's younger brother Tommy visited. Now 22, he walked with a slight limp from the childhood accident that had contributed to the family's financial troubles. Thunder, who had remained wary of everyone except Emily, pricked his ears at Tommy's approach. He remembers me, Tommy said wonderingly. He pulled something from his pocket, a battered plastic horse brush. I kept it all these years. It was in my hospital room after the accident. Mom said Thunder used to wait by the paddock fence every day, watching for my car to come home. Emily felt tears welling up. I didn't know that. That's because you were away at college by then, Tommy replied. But he never forgot. Every day, same time, he'd stand there waiting. Even after I was home, when I couldn't walk yet, Dad would drive me down to the barn, and Thunder would come right up to my wheelchair. The brush Tommy had brought proved magical. Something about its familiar feel seemed to unlock memories for Thunder. He began accepting grooming from others, though Emily remained his primary caregiver. Slowly, his coat began to regain its shine. Physical therapy was more challenging. The old leg injury had healed improperly, leaving Thunder with chronic pain and limited mobility. Emily designed a therapy program combining traditional veterinary medicine with newer rehabilitation techniques she'd studied in school. Watch his expression, she instructed the therapy team. He'll tell us when it's too much. But Thunder surprised them all. Despite the pain, he gave everything to his rehabilitation. Emily would often find him practicing his exercises on his own, repeatedly flexing and stretching his injured leg in the way they'd shown him. 6 weeks into his rehabilitation, they had an unexpected visitor. A teenage girl arrived at the barn, asking to see Thunder. She introduced herself as Jenny Cooper, explaining that she had worked at Grayson's holiday trails 2 summers ago. "I knew something was wrong there," she said, watching Thunder graze in his paddock. "The way they treated the horses, especially the older ones. I tried to help when I could, sneaking them extra food and care. Thunder was always so gentle, even when riders were rough with him. He protected me once." Emily leaned forward. "Protected you?" Jenny nodded. "Mr. Grayson's son was cruel to the horses. One day, he was angry about something and started hitting one of the ponies with a whip. I tried to stop him, and he turned on me. But Thunder broke free from his tie and put himself between us. Just stood there, not attacking, just protecting. Mr. Grayson fired me the next day, said I was disrupting the business. But I never forgot what Thunder did." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a folder. "I took pictures, kept records. Dates, incidents, everything I saw. I've been too scared to show anyone, but when I heard Thunder was safe now." She handed the folder to Emily. "Maybe this can help other horses there." The documentation Jenny provided was thorough and damning. Emily immediately contacted the authorities and her veterinary board. Within weeks, investigations were launched into Grayson's holiday trails and several associated businesses. But the most remarkable change was in Thunder himself. After Jenny's visit, it was as if a weight had been lifted. He began entering his stall voluntarily, started nickering greetings to other horses, and even allowed the farrier to work on his hooves without anxiety. "It's like he knows he did the right thing," Emily told Dr. Chen during Thunder's next checkup. "Like he was carrying this burden of fear and guilt, and now he can finally let it go." The blood work showed improvement too. Thunder's organ function was stabilizing, his pain levels were decreasing, and he had gained weight. He still had a long way to go, but the progress was undeniable. One evening, as Emily finished the day's therapy session, she noticed Thunder watching the sunset with his ears pricked forward, a pose so reminiscent of his younger days that it made her heart ache. But this time, the ache was mixed with hope. "You know what, old friend?" she said softly. "I think we're going to make it." Thunder turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw something that had been missing since their reunion: trust. Not just in her, but in life itself. The broken spirit she had found at the auction was healing, just like his body. What Emily didn't know was that the biggest challenge still lay ahead. Because sometimes, healing the body is the easy part. It's healing the heart that takes true courage, and Thunder's heart was about to face its greatest test. 3 months after the auction, on a crisp autumn morning, Emily arrived at the barn to find Thunder colicking. The signs were subtle at first: a slight loss of appetite, some restlessness. But Emily's veterinary training set off immediate alarm bells. Within hours, Thunder's condition deteriorated dramatically. "It's a twisted gut," Dr. Chen confirmed after examining him. "We need to get him to the surgical hospital immediately." She hesitated, choosing her next words carefully. "Emily, you know the risks. At his age, with his history." "Call the transport," Emily interrupted. Now, the journey to the veterinary hospital was tense. Thunder, normally stoic in the face of pain, was clearly suffering despite the medication. Emily rode in the trailer with him, supporting his head, whispering encouragement. She couldn't help remembering another trailer ride, years ago, when she had been powerless to stay with him. "Not this time," she promised. "I'm not leaving you again." The surgical team was waiting when they arrived. Dr. James Morrison, the lead surgeon, reviewed Thunder's case with growing concern. "The surgery itself is risky enough," he explained, "but his previous health issues complicate everything. The anesthesia alone could be too much for his system." "What are his chances without surgery?" Emily asked, already knowing the answer. "Hours, maybe less." Dr. Morrison's expression softened. "I understand you're a vet, Dr. Matthews. If this were any other case. But it's not any other case, Emily finished. This is Thunder. And he's not done fighting. As if in response to her words, Thunder lifted his head from where he had been standing quietly in the examination area. His eyes, though clouded with pain, met Emily's with the same trust she had seen that first day, years ago, when a frightened abandoned horse had chosen to believe in a young girl's love. Prep for surgery, Dr. Morrison ordered. The next 4 hours were the longest of Emily's life. She paced the waiting room, remembering every moment with Thunder, the early morning rides, the quiet conversations, the way he had protected Jenny at the trail riding facility, his patient waiting for Tommy. Each memory was a prayer, a plea for more time. Mr. Anderson arrived halfway through the surgery, bringing coffee and quiet support. I called some folks from the auction, he said. They're all pulling for him. Jenny showed up too, still carrying her documentation folder. The investigators are closing down Grayson's other operations, she reported. More horses are being rescued. Thunder started all of that, you know. He's a hero. Tommy came straight from his physical therapy session, still in his workout clothes. Remember when I was learning to walk again? He asked Emily. How Thunder would match his pace to my wobbling steps. The therapist said having him there motivated me more than anything else. Finally, Dr. Morrison emerged, looking exhausted but satisfied. He made it through surgery, he announced. The next 24 hours are critical, but... He smiled. Well, let's just say I've never seen a horse fight so hard to live. The recovery process was grueling. Thunder needed round-the-clock care, careful monitoring, and a complex medication schedule. Emily took a leave of absence from her veterinary practice, sleeping in the hospital barn. Other vets offered to cover her cases, many of them having heard Thunder's story through the professional grapevine. A week after the surgery, Emily was sitting with Thunder in his hospital stall when she received an unexpected call. The investigation into Grayson's holiday trails had led to Marcus Fletcher, the man who had originally bought Thunder at auction. He was facing charges related to fraud and animal cruelty. We found records of hundreds of horses he bought under false pretenses, the investigator explained. He's cooperating now, trying to get a lighter sentence. Says he wants to make amends. Emily looked at Thunder, who was dozing peacefully in his deeply bedded stall. The only amends that matter are the ones we make to ourselves, she said quietly. Thunder's recovery continued to defy expectations. By the end of the second week, he was strong enough to take short walks around the hospital grounds. Emily noticed he always wanted to stop at other horses' windows, especially those who seemed distressed or afraid. He would stand quietly, offering silent companionship until they calmed. He's doing what you did for him, Dr. Chen observed. Being there, showing them they're not alone. On the day Thunder was finally cleared to return home, the horse community turned out in force. Mr. Anderson had organized a welcome celebration, complete with a special grain-free cake for Thunder decorated with carrots and apple slices. Jenny brought pictures of other horses who had been rescued thanks to her documentation. Tommy led Thunder off the trailer, both of them moving slowly but surely, supporting each other, as they always had. But the most remarkable moment came later that evening, after the visitors had left. Emily was putting Thunder in his paddock for the night when she noticed something extraordinary. He walked straight to the stall door, nudged it open with his nose, and walked inside on his own. Then he turned to look at her, as if to say, I'm ready now. This is home. Emily sat in the stall with him, just as she had done when she was 12 years old, sharing her secrets with an abandoned horse. Thunder curled his neck around her in that old familiar way, and together they watched the stars through the barn window. You know what, Thunder? Emily said softly. Sometimes the longest journeys just lead us back to where we were always meant to be. Thunder's gentle nicker seemed to agree. He was home, not just in a physical place, but in his heart. The frightened, abandoned horse had become a survivor, a protector, a healer. And Emily, the young girl who had once promised to find him again, had become the woman who kept that promise. In the years that followed, Thunder's story became a symbol of hope in the equine community. His medical case was studied by veterinary students, showing how age and trauma need not be barriers to healing. The legislation sparked by Jenny's documentation became known as Thunder's Law, protecting horses in commercial operations. But for Thunder and Emily, the greatest victory was much simpler. It was in the quiet moments of each day, the gentle exchanges of trust, the peaceful sharings of space, the deep understanding that can exist between a human and a horse who choose, again and again, to believe in each other. Because in the end, that's what their story was really about. Not just the journey home, but the courage to keep believing in home even when the path seems lost. Thunder had waited, Emily had searched, and together they had proven that some bonds are stronger than time, stronger than hardship, stronger even than goodbye. They had proven that love, in its purest form, always finds its way home.